We are back on What the Funk, and today we're going to take it to the banks. Ryan Fairbanks, the land runner himself. Ryan, I'm glad we were able to finally get this scheduled. I think I had to push you off once, maybe twice. I think I pushed you off twice. And your turn to push me off, of course. You had some sort of illness, and we rescheduled this for today. So thank you for your flexibility. Glad we were able to finally make it. And I'll just jump right into it. Another Mountain States guy. I'm just to the east of you in Colorado. You reside over in Utah. And I will pose the question to you like I pose to every one of my guests. Who are you, Ryan Fairbanks?
Yeah, I'm a landman, I'm a husband, I'm a father, and recently just became a grandfather. I've
Ooh.
been in the land business for, since 2005. So coming up on 20 years.
Well, congratulations. Less so on 20 years of being a landman. I mean, I guess maybe you deserve congratulations for that, but more so on becoming a newly minted grandfather. That is super exciting. And it's the time of year, right? The three F's. Well, the four F's in our case: family, food, football, and of course, funks in our case. But Thanksgiving's always my favorite holiday. Just people getting together. You overeat, you take a nap, you watch your football team probably lose if you're a Cowboys fan. Ouch. Sorry to all my Cowboys fan listeners. But yeah, it's an amazing day. It's a glorious time of year. And I think I'm ready for a little bit of a slowdown. This has been a pretty intense year, I feel like, from a business perspective. Maybe you can relate to that a little bit. That there was some election fatigue, I think, just for everybody, as can happen in the election cycle, and a lot of ups and downs, both personally and professionally, not just for me. I feel like this has been a theme with a lot of people. But Ryan, I want to go back a little bit with you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? What did you do before you got into oil and gas? Give me sort of the younger version, your story.
Yeah, sure. Um, to respond to your four F's, yeah, it works for the Fairbanks as well. So that works for me.
There we go.
Growing up, central Utah. So take the state of Utah on a map, put an X through it, and right there in the middle, that's where I grew up. Emery County, rural Utah, uh, small town. We called it a city, but like less than 5,000 people. It's hard to call that a city. Super rural Utah. Dad was a auto mechanics teacher at the high school. So grew up with grease and oil under my fingernails, playing with cars and just living rural life. So substantially that was my growing up, was that kind of a rural environment where you kind of know just about everybody or something about them, and everybody knows you and your business and they want to be in it.
Yeah, very similar to my upbringing. Not the dad teaching, um, shop or whatever in high school, but I grew up in central New Hampshire. New Hampshire is not a box like Utah, so it's a little bit. I guess if you combine New Hampshire and Vermont, it's more of like an upside down rectangle or something. But anyways, I grew up in central New Hampshire. My town, Rumney, was, I don't know, 1,500 people, but the big city, the sprawling metropolis nearby, Plymouth, had about 5,000. So I can relate to sort of knowing everybody's business, other people wanting to be in your business, everybody knowing certainly all of the families and what they're all about. And it's nice. Like I think that foundation has been helpful for me. It always sort of gave me the appetite to do something more, to branch out, to see the world, to expand my horizons, both personally and professionally. So I sort of knew I was not going to end up back in New Hampshire. For you, though, you did stay in Utah, but you moved somewhere else in Utah, right? How far from where you grew up do you live now?
That's about a 2.5, 3 hour drive there. So the nearby city for us was Price, Utah, which small, still pretty small, junior college town, about a half an hour away.
Yeah, yeah. Plymouth, New Hampshire was a small college town, so I'm seeing some of the similarities that we grew up with. I would think that with your dad being an automotive, teacher, you probably know a little bit about cars, right? So do you still like do your own oil changes and fix your own car and your kids' cars when things go wrong?
I know how to. Just because I can doesn't mean I should. To borrow a title from Mike McConnell's book. But no, I do not do my own oil changes. I learned when I was in college that I could do them. I bought myself a pair of ramps, and for a few years when I was in college, and that's what the budget dictated, I did my own oil changes. But as soon as I could afford to have somebody else do it, I was like, yeah, I can find a better use for that hour or two that it might take me to
Yeah.
do it, and let somebody else do it in 20 minutes.
Yeah. It's something I never learned how to do. And I've actually talked about this on this podcast before, but like, for whatever reason, like, automotive shop, it wasn't a class that I took, or really a lot of, like, I would say, like, the high honors students took. I should have taken it. Like, there was really a lot of applicable real life stuff there, in shop, and they would, work on like students' trucks and things like that to learn and figure things out. So I almost wish if I could go back, and give my younger self some advice for that age is, don't look down on the trades, right? Like, I think that I sort of had this mindset of, no, I needed to take English honors and AP US history, and there was nothing wrong with that. I think there was a lot of value in those types of classes, and it exercised a muscle in my brain that I needed. But I also should have taken some of the more sort of blue collar trade types of classes that I think would have been helpful. So, did you have your dad as a teacher in high school?
I never took a class from him. I was like, I live with him at home. I spend all summer chasing project cars with him so that he'll have stuff for his students to work on during the school year. I don't need to take his class.
Yeah.
Now, looking back, wish that I had taken a class from him to see him interacting on that level with other students. But I just never did.
Yeah. No, I get it. I mean, I think my mom was an elementary school art teacher. My dad was a psychology professor at the college. And I think because my mom was an art teacher, I sort of like rebelled against art. I took like very few art electives and art classes, which is
Uh-huh.
silly. Like, I went to Paris earlier this year and I went to the Louvre, and I'm like, oh, I remember my mom talking about some of this stuff. Like, this is cool. Like, I should have leaned into art more. Maybe I even have some skills there that I just never tapped into, but maybe too late now. Um,
Well, you're
so,
doing a
so
different form of art, and you're doing podcasting and creating something different. Just because it's not graphic artist traditional kind of art doesn't mean you're not exercising that creative muscle.
well, I appreciate that. And of course, with Funk Futures too, there's a creative element to that with some of the marketing and branding and content stuff that we do. So, I thank you. That's a kind thing to say. I've always thought of this more as like, my dad would go up there and lecture for hours. So I thought that maybe a lot of this was like some of the skills that he passed down, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to talk and listen and articulate like complex concepts and try to distill them down to make them digestible. But anyways, I guess I'm an artist. I'll start putting that on my LinkedIn title, Jeremy Funk, artist. But for you, Ryan, are you watching this new show, Landman?
I haven't watched the first episode or two yet. I know a little bit about it, and I've been involved in being aware of it and what's going on with it, and kind of some of the response to it. So uh, I am going to be reviewing one of the episodes coming up in the future.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet either. I probably will just because it hits like relatively close to home, having been in oil and gas for so long. It
Mm-hmm.
sounds like there's some liberties being taken, and it's more like just an oil and gas show versus a landman show, right? But nonetheless, I gotta ask you, right? Like, I'm not a landman. How do you get into the profession of being a landman, and what does a landman do?
Yeah, really kind of two basic paths that people come into being a landman. So one is the way I came in, which is just coming up through the trenches, like you network and you meet somebody and they've got a project, and there's this phase of land work that there's a period of it when it kind of is, can you fog a mirror? Okay, we'll use you. And that's not when I came in. It wasn't one of those phases. Um, but we did bring on a lot of people that had no background in oil and gas. The other way that people come into the land business is more the formal education route, where they go to maybe an AAPL accredited school, or they go to a land management or energy management type school and get a bachelor's degree, and then they do an internship with an oil and gas company. And most likely those people who go more the formal route end up getting the in-house jobs, where you work for a Chevron or an Ovintiv or an Oxy, a big one of the major oil and gas companies, as an in-house engineer or geologist or landman.
Yeah, so a couple different paths there, right? And I feel like a lot of lawyers end up landmen or
Mm-hmm.
heading up land departments as well. My friend Stephen Hatcher, the minerals guy, his background was through, um, going through law school, passing the bar, and then eventually becoming a landman. I think there's a lot of complementary skills. Certainly, you have to read a lot of contracts, right? You have to
Yeah.
know how to
Yes.
analyze documents and be able to sift through, in some cases, hundreds of years of data and details to be able to get the real answer uh, on on what's happening on the land. And then I think there's also, like you said, like a little bit more of a technical component, because I think GIS and mapping has been tied into land as well. And I think of that
Yeah.
as a little more of like a technical, almost engineering centric type of role, or IT, I think, in other cases. So where do you fit in those couple buckets that you mentioned?
Yeah, definitely an analytical component to doing land work. Where I find I thrive the most is in negotiating. So, negotiating
Mm,
oil and gas leases. I had a mentor that took me through a course of about 2 or 3 years of each of several disciplines. So, I started off doing negotiating. That's where I came in. I had some sales experience, and he brought me in and said, I think you can handle doing leasing. And I said, okay, tell me about that. Describe it. And the more he described it, to me, to put it in a nutshell, is kind of like reverse sales. Instead of calling people and asking them to buy something, they have an asset that's being underutilized, oil and gas interest, that we'd like to lease. So you call and offer them money. Sounds like a pretty tough sell. I think I can handle that. Um,
yeah.
so I spent a few years leasing. As a natural element of that, I learned how to do title, because you call people and, oh, mom or dad passed away, and now we're trying to figure out how to move it to the next generation. And so you end up getting involved in the attorney type elements, where you're dealing with contracts and heirship and estates, and how do you cure that title so that it gets to the next generation and the oil and gas company actually will pay them, instead of it sitting in suspense and the royalties just accumulating, but nobody has access to them. Um, so title, and then I got into doing right of way and surface use agreements, and the title for that, and managing a surface team, which included title researchers and negotiators.
Very cool. Yeah, I like how you broke that all down. It's digestible, I think, is the way to put it. Um, Simplifying a process that can be complex, because I've been told running title or chain of title is actually not very straightforward or simple, right? Like you mentioned, great great grandpa Joe, right, has this farm in rural Utah, and oil and gas wells have been drilled on it. And then at some point, great great grandpa Joe passes away, and nobody's actually getting the money at that point from the oil and gas company that's being created from the production held on that
Mm-hmm.
lease. So when somebody eventually does say, hey, this is my land, or you guys run title, you do your analysis and say, hey, family, this is your title, what happens to all of the royalty money that had been accumulated over the years?
Yeah, in order to clear that, being in suspense is what it's called in the industry. When we don't know who the heirs are, they haven't signed a contract, it hasn't effectively been moved to the new heirs, then the oil companies, because they don't have a clear direction of who to pay that to, they just hold it in a reserve account, a suspense account.
Yeah.
It does have to be paid out to the rightful owners, but there's a period where you need to figure out who those rightful owners are. So once that gets figured out, in some cases, I had a really interesting one when I was doing some leasing in Colorado, actually. I got handed this family that we knew. It had been like great great grandpa Joe. It was four generations of, they never did any formal estate planning because it was a big ranch and it was just like poor rural ranching family. Why
Sure.
should we pay an attorney to do any estate planning? Because we're just poor ranchers.
Sure.
um, but thousands of acres of property and mineral rights with it. And you go down three or four generations, and it turned into, I think it was 63 heirs.
Wow.
And I spent a year and a half chasing down and leasing and doing the curative legal side of things to make sure we had everything in place and all of the heirs agreed that each other were the heirs of these multiple estates and how it got divided up to everybody.
That's awesome. I mean, it's a lot of work, I'm sure, but you're basically saying, hey, you might have some money owed to you. Can you respond back to me? Right. And they're like, well, first of all, who are you? Second of all, is this a scam? Right. And
Yes.
then you're like, no, actually, there's money that's been sitting in an account that is rightfully, legally yours. Do you want it? Right. And then all of a sudden I could see some of the infighting that happens of, well, Grandpa Joe actually left me this and that. Right. And boy, that's a lot. That's really fascinating stuff. Have you seen some suspense accounts or like money, royalties distributed that were substantial in your career?
Not a ton. Most of the leasing and the curative and generational transfer that I've been involved with has been more on the pre-production side of stuff.
Got it.
So there isn't a suspense account created yet in most of what I've dealt with. I have, in the recent couple of years, gotten more into mineral management and finding mineral rights that there is a suspense account. And it's been recent, in the last 3 to 5 years, a parent has passed away. And so it's sitting in suspense. So not a ton of time has accumulated or royalties in order to distribute that. But yes, there have been some suspense accounts that I've dealt with, and it can be substantial for sure. And especially if the number of heirs is not vast, if you don't
Yeah.
have a big family who are all also having big families to divide it up to, what mom or dad had in their estate divided by three or four heirs can still be quite substantial.
Got it. So when an oil and gas company, I mean, oil and gas is highly acquisitive, right? Companies buy companies all the time.
Yes, we're
And I'm
seeing that right now. I
assuming
mean, it's one of those seasons.
it
It's
is.
acquisition and divestiture time. And I mean, like right here where I am in the Una Basin, we've got two operators that are right in the middle of transition
Yeah. I
from,
mean, SM here in Denver made a huge play out there. And I'm hearing from, my
yeah,
friends who work in the field and go out to the Uinta Basin that it's very promising. Some people have even said it's the next Permian. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but they're seeing some pretty incredible initial production rates and nice clean crude coming out of the Uinta Basin. So I would guess it's going to stay busy out there.
yeah, yeah, that's what we're seeing. And especially if the railroad goes through, that'll open up transportation getting product out of the basin a
Yeah.
lot easier.
Yeah, takeaway capacity is a big deal. So when an oil and gas company gets acquired, I'm assuming they're also then acquiring the suspense, right?
Yep.
Oh, they're also acquiring the suspense, right?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. And that can make it even harder, I think, to chase down the money. You're just dealing with more and more people and more hands and different banks and various other things. That's fascinating stuff. Let's transition a little bit. I wanted to talk to you about Landrunner. So what do you do? What does your business do? How do you help people? And talk about the podcast a little bit later, but jump into Landrunner. Like, who are you guys?
Yeah, two elements to it really. There's the land services side, so that's energy production, leasing, contracts, title work, all of those elements of being a landman and a land services brokerage where we have other independent contractors that we can subcontract out to take care of that work. And then the other side of that is the coaching and professional development. So that's helping independent landmen learn land skills that help them serve clients. So negotiating, title work, leadership, network and communication kinds of things.
How long have you guys been around?
Um, well, I started doing land work. I've always been an independent contractor in 2005. So since then, and then officially, so I had a different entity that we did business under for a while, and then officially Landrunner was launched in 2015.
Nice. And talk to me a little bit about the podcast. When did you decide to start the podcast? What's it called? What's the focus of it? I'm assuming I can guess that it's land focused, but tell me a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, started in 2020. The year when people start things, right?
Losing their minds.
Started working on it in 2019, and really the focus was how can I serve other land professionals like myself beyond my immediate crew? Because I was managing, I had a couple of title agents that were running surface title and 7 land agents that were acquiring right away and surface use agreements. So managing that crew of about 10 people and reflecting on how can I serve a broader audience? Who else can I help in some way? I've been in the business a little while. I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything because you just can't. The volume of things that can be known in this industry is just so vast. But is there something that I could add that would serve other people? And is there a way I can serve beyond my immediate crew that I interact with on a day-to-day basis? And so that's where the podcast was born out of, is how can I connect people with other professionals in the industry to help them develop these skills?
Very cool. It's noble. A little bit different from why I started my podcast. Mine's like, I'm a sales guy, and with COVID, I couldn't get in front of people anymore. Right. So then how do I still kind of cultivate a brand and have people know like where I work and what I do, what my team does, without talking to people face to face? Because as you know, this is a very, conference centric, face to face kind of old school handshake industry.
Right.
And then I think during COVID, we did see a bit of a transition, or an addition, I should say, with sort of the digital content and media becoming more of a real viable way to create business and brand. And I think it's been a positive for me. I'm sure it's been a positive for you. But I think your cause is a good one. It's a noble one. So I commend you for that. I want to shift a little bit to another topic that I think is kind of interesting that you and I had talked about on a session where we didn't record, and that is alcohol. So you don't drink,
Yeah,
and
correct.
I don't drink, but you're like a pretty social guy, and so am I. And we go to all of these events, right? I'm curious, like, what advice you'd have for people that may be uncomfortable in a social situation and like to lube themselves up with some alcohol to talk to people. You've obviously built a fine career without having any alcohol. I decided to give it up a couple of years ago. But how does that work? Right? I think a lot of people have even asked me that of like, how do you go to these events and not drink? So I want to turn that back around on you, Ryan. Like, what would you suggest to other people that don't drink in these very social settings in a very booze-heavy industry, for lack of a better way to put it?
Yeah. Going back to the first kind of conference like that I went to uh, before I got into land, actually, and there was a happy hour event. We were in Louisville, Kentucky, at the Louisville Slugger Museum,
Nice.
and so sports. I mean, I see behind you the baseball shots and
Yeah.
but yeah, happy hour at the Slugger Museum, and guys going to the bar and just me hanging back, going, okay, so the first time I was ever at one of these, right? Nobody had really given me any kind of pointers as to how do I handle that, what do I say, but I'd grown up with a lifetime of not drinking, so
Yeah.
I don't drink. Can I get a Sprite? How about a chocolate milk? What else is available?
What do you got?
How about a screwdriver without the screw?
There we go.
So
Yeah.
I've learned how to have a little fun with it too. Um, Recently, just this last week, I was over in Denver at the Denver Land Institute, and they had bookending the event happy hour the night before, Rocky's Bash the night after. Um, and I was pleased to find out about some of the other people in the room who, like you, have chosen to give it up and just saying, I don't drink that garbage anymore. Or
Yeah.
hearing them say, I, for my health, for my mind, I decided this wasn't good for me. It got me in places that I didn't want to be. And so I decided to make a change. And one guy said, I'm down like 30, 35 pounds and
Yeah.
healthier and happier than I've ever been.
I think that there's been a bit of a shift where with alcohol, it used to be kind of weird if you were at an event like that and people, why are you not drinking? Right. To
Mm-hmm.
like, there's something wrong with you. Versus now, I think that it's really, people really commend you. I think there's just more information now about some of the detriments of alcohol. And some people, many people that I know have either given it up or reduced it quite substantially. But it's kind of one of those things where when it's around you and it's totally normalized, like I like watching football. Obviously, I'm a sports guy. You notice it, right? You notice how many beer commercials and how many ads and how many
Mm-hmm.
banners for Budweiser and Bud Light. And, here we are, Coors like owns Colorado, right?
Yeah.
It's everywhere and it's everything. And I think that it just has become so normalized, at least in this country, that we forget that there are some real detriments to it health wise, among others. So kudos to you. Keep that going. That's good stuff. So I'm curious as well. Some of the conferences that you go to, like I think NAPE has historically been like the biggest land show of the year. You mentioned AAPL. What are some of the conferences that you go to get business, to interact with other land people, and further your knowledge and skills in the discipline?
Yeah, the AAPL annual meeting has been the one that I've been most involved with. Had the opportunity a couple years ago to be on the education committee, which was primarily tasked with education for that annual meeting. So great opportunity to interact with the speakers that were involved and going to be coming to those meetings. And so that's the primary one that I've been involved with. And then as of late, getting more involved and familiar with the local associations. So the Denver APL group that just did the Denver Land Institute. Montana has a good group. The Montana APL group just started again doing a fall seminar.
Mm,
So an education event paired with a golfing event and charity fundraiser. And many of the local associations are very involved in that kind of thing, doing charity fundraisers and some kind of informal networking, be it golf, clay pigeon shooting. Denver in the spring, like at the end of ski season, does a ski day,
mm,
um, fly fishing adventures. I mean,
wow.
a variety of things, but they're all geared around how can we get together and do something that benefits other people, doing education events and charity fundraisers.
Yeah, I like the land folks, right? I've sort of worked all across the disciplines on the business side, on the sales side, with finance, accounting, operations, engineering, geos, as well as sort of the land and A&D. I would sort of group together a little bit. Um, and the AAPL annual conference, I've been now a couple times. Both times were in Boston, which for me is awesome. My whole family's still back in the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
Boston's kind of where my heart is, and this year was in Boston, so it was super fun to get back there. I think it was really hot weather. The weather was hot, which like I think a lot of the people that are going are from Texas or Oklahoma, and they're like, we're coming here to get away from the heat. Like, what's going on? Why is this happening? But really festive, really fun, just like a kind, open group of people. I've really enjoyed like my interactions with land folks, and particularly shout out to AAPL. I think they run a tremendous annual conference, and they always pick fun locations. Like they um, and embrace whatever's happening locally as well, right? Like we didn't just stay in the hotel the whole time at the conference. We were out and about and doing lots of things, and there's optional tours and
Right.
got to see some of Boston that I haven't seen since like I was a kid doing the same thing. So that was a blast for me. Do you go to NAPE? Is that one of your kind of anchor shows as well?
I have not been to NAPE yet. I'm
Mm.
really seriously considering it for this coming NAPE. Yeah, looking at that.
I would recommend it. I mean, it's one of those shows I've been probably 15 times, right? And, sometimes have a booth, sometimes not. It's fun. It's big. When the oil industry's good, there's really a great vibe. When it's not, it's a bit of a different vibe, right? Don't want to quite
Mm-hmm.
say it's a morgue, but it's closer to a morgue than a party. Um, Drowning your sorrows instead of celebrating your successes, right? Some years, but no, it's really a great show, and I would highly recommend for you in terms of what you do going to that. So, I'm a businessman. You're a businessman. I'm curious. Like, how do you get your business? Like, is the podcast a driver for business? Do you just have like a name now in the segment or niche of the market that you play in? How do you get business?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the podcast is there yet as far as really being a driver for business. Before I started doing it, I interacted with several people who had podcasts, and they gave me some wise advice that has helped me be patient with the development of it. And that
Yeah.
was, you got to play the long game. This is not
Okay.
a do it for 3 months or 6 months and think that you're going to start just seeing the return pour in. Now, some people manage to do that because of the nature of the podcast or show, but by and large, they're the exception more than the rule. Like it's a long game, and it's building relationships, and that comes back to the conferences too. And how I get business is it's building relationships with people. And so over time, there's a manager for a local oil and gas company that operates here in the Uinta Basin that I've known for 15 years. I
Mm.
first met him, we ran into each other in a local recorder's office. But we've bumped into each other at industry conferences. We see each other in the recorder's offices. We have neighboring, if not overlapping, plays. And so sometimes maybe there's some interaction there. But building a reputation of being a professional, being engaged in the work, still being engaged in the work, and somebody who can pull together a project, manage a project. Um, that's the reputation that I'm working to build, is that we can be helpful to these projects getting what they need, which is the contracts and the relationships with the landowners so that they can do energy development. And so um, I've had some business that's come that way as of late, but it's relationship, a lot of it around conferences and people that you meet, have interaction with, figure out how to interact more than just waiting another year till the next conference, but
Yeah,
staying in touch with people. And usually that is more, it needs to be an intentional thing, like who's going to take the initiative. And it's not just staying in touch because I'm trying to get business from them, but build the relationship, because people can
that's
see
right.
through the facade of I'm trying to get business from you.
Yep. Yeah, a couple things that I want to sift through because you made some salient points. I like to refer to sales, and let's admit it, as a consultant, you're always in sales, right? You're trying to sell
Mm-hmm.
and get your next contract, get your future business, whether it's immediate or long term. I look at it as sales as a bank, right? You've got to make deposits constantly, and if you're just always going to people with something to sell to them, then you're just looking for withdrawals every time you go to the bank. And then I don't need to explain to you what happens if you make too many withdrawals from your bank without making enough deposits.
Right.
So the deposits, the value added things that you can do, reaching out to people to see how they're doing in an authentic way, as opposed to trying to pitch something, sell something every single time, is the long game, right? And that's sort of the way that I've approached business and life, I think, to a large extent. The other thing is on podcasting. I think there's a reason why most podcasts shut down at like 10 episodes. It's because I'm going to start this podcast and everybody's going to see me. I'm going to get all this business. And then what happens? It doesn't. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is like my 171st episode of this. So of course now it is a bit of like a top of funnel driver, and it helps if you have your own business. But it's hard to get through those first initial episodes because you're not good at it. Like no one's just like a natural podcaster, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
that some people are more cut out for it than others, but I've even listened to some of my early episodes. I'm like, oh, this is so scripted. Like I sent you the prep questions to this. I go through the questions, and back then I could hear myself, right? And Tim, rest in peace, my former podcast co-host. And it's like we were clearly reading off of a piece of paper and asking the questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when you do that is you don't listen, and it sounds scripted, and it's just never as good of a product. But eventually you get comfortable. And now I actually really look forward to this because this is, we're at about 40 minutes. Like, I haven't checked my phone once. I haven't checked my email. There's been no distractions. Just having a good conversation with a good person is rare these days, frankly, without checking my phone or, wondering who's at my front door. Is that the Amazon guy? Like, actually locked in and focused and having conversation. So a couple more hot seat questions I'm going to put you on, and then I'll let you go and enjoy your rest of your Friday before the weekend, which leads into a light week next week and Thanksgiving. Just again, a great time of year. What advice would you give to your younger self? If you could sit down and talk to the 18-year-old, 21, 25-year-old Ryan Fairbanks, what would you tell him?
Yeah, the big thing I think there is just be patient with the relationship building. Like for me, looking back, and especially as you've talked some about kind of that sales process and the banking, build, make deposits, add value, is looking back, just like you looked back on your earlier episodes, looking back on conversations that I've had with people, I recognize ways that I've been so excited about how I can help somebody or the service that we can provide that I am impatient with developing the relationship. So that's one thing I would say to my earlier self is be patient with that. Development is it's growth. It's a process and it takes time. And you don't grow, particular to some fruit trees, especially. You don't plant it and harvest the next day. Uh, in some cases, it takes years or decades before it's to a productive state. And so that's a big part of it. The skills that we develop as a land professional, I would say to independent contractor, landmen especially, you're not going to come out of the gate and just go negotiate a beautiful oil and gas lease that everybody loves the first time you do it.
But I want to
It
do that.
it
I want to plant
takes
the tree and have it bear fruit overnight. Come on, man.
yeah, it takes practice. It takes time. Um, I had a cousin recommend a book to me, and I don't even remember the title of it right now. But one of the real key points that I got from this book was the value of career capital. When you've spent a decade or two or three developing skills in this area, and people can look at that and go, it just takes so long. I don't want to do that. But the things that we can do when we've been in an industry for a couple decades that we've learned how to do almost instinctively. It's not a strict process. It's not a script that you formally have to look at and read line by line or every word to get it right. Because we've done it so many times
Yeah.
that it's a practice. It's a way of being that we've learned over a career.
It's a great answer. Patience, listening, again, patience are very, very important skills, and investing in your own career capital. I've been really fortunate that I have a friend who is a professor. He's actually a professor of sales at a university called Bentley, just outside of Boston. It was actually right down the street from Brandeis, where I went to school. And he's an awesome professor. He's a career sales guy. I think he's in the pharma, biotech space. And what he likes to do is have successful salespeople, people that have had a long running career in sales, come on and talk to his class and let them ask questions. I love it because it's 20, 21, 22-year olds that are just about to embark in their career. They're passionate, they're smart, they're hardworking, and they really want that overnight success, right? And I think one of the things that I really preach to with them is like, yeah, they're like, so, when you started your own business, like what were the toughest? And I'm like, well, just doing it. Like the idea for me of starting my own business, I don't think I had the confidence to be able to do it. Even if other people would have told me, yeah, you have all the skills and the background experience and wherewithal to do it. But
Mm-hmm.
actually just doing it was hard. I would also tell you, Mr. 20-year-old, like you don't really know anything yet, right? Like you're going to fail and that's okay, right? It's how you bounce back and respond to that failure. And always echoing like, what are some of the keys to being a good salesman? I was like, forget everything that you've seen on TV, right? It's
Yeah.
the best salespeople are the best listeners, right? And people that understand when business is not going to happen and allow that to be okay and abort and find more qualified, better opportunities. So it's almost counterintuitive in some ways because you think the best salespeople should be wearing 3-piece suits and slick talkers. That's just not how it is. Okay, another hot seat question, Mr. Fairbanks. What is
Yeah.
Utah like known for food wise? And with that, like what's your favorite restaurant in Utah?
Food wise, as far as like restaurants and that kind of stuff, man, I don't know. Like it's not, in Texas, it's barbecue, right?
Yeah, and I'd say Colorado, it's like green chili, I guess. And maybe that's a New Mexico thing, but there's green chili everywhere. What does Utah have? What's your thing there?
Well, for unusual, um, green Jello with shredded carrots is one that a lot of people haven't heard of and probably never tried. I haven't had any in probably 30 years since I was, a kid at home. But maybe more mainstream is like funeral potatoes. So this is a casserole dish with potatoes and cheese, and like you can make a whole big casserole dish and feed your whole family on it. But they're called funeral potatoes because people make them and bring them to funerals because there's going to be a crowd of people that need
Need to be fed.
to be fed.
All right. Okay. So when you go to Utah, you answered the question perfectly. Green Jello with sliced carrots. Okay.
Not sliced,
And
shredded.
shredded,
Carrots.
shredded. Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. I'm going to Google this after the podcast ends. And funeral potatoes sounds
If
good.
you
Ryan,
go eat it, you won't thank me later. Trust me. It's just different. That's all.
funeral potatoes actually sounds like a good Thanksgiving side, but
It
that's
is. Yeah, it
I'm
is.
going to have to look into that. Ryan, where can people find you? Like, LinkedIn, website, things like that, if anybody wants to reach out to you.
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to connect. That's where I'm most active. I looked back the other day and I started building my LinkedIn network in 2013.
Okay.
So, I mean, I wasn't on right at the beginning, but I've been on LinkedIn for a while. And so that's the best place to connect. Um, I have a group on there, Land Skills Network. We've been building a paid community where
Cool.
people can come and develop their land skills. So that's that coaching side of the land runner business. But yeah, LinkedIn's the best place to connect.
Fantastic. Ryan, it's been really nice to have you on today. It's been good to get to know you. Appreciate you reaching out, going back and forth, and having the patience, again, as a theme, to bear with me on a couple cancellations and finally come on. So, Ryan Fairbanks, thanks for coming on What the Funk.
Thanks, Jeremy.